About children, I think we need to be clear what we are talking about, don't we? Because we've seen a number of cases where when we talk about children, we're, okay, technically speaking, legally, 16 to 17-year-olds are children, but in our minds, if we are picturing an 8-year-old arriving on their own, that's rather different from someone who's sort of 17 and a half and has come here of their own accord or has claimed to have been a child when actually they're later shown to be in their 20s. This has happened on an awful lot of occasions. So what are we actually talking about when we talk about 200 children here?
Well, technically, the definition is up to the age of 18. And so if you look at the figures from the government from 2000, they would suggest that 47,000 unaccompanied children under the age of 18 have arrived on the shores of the UK. And that's where Robert Jenrick's 4,000 come from. What we don't get is a breakdown of whether they are from age 2, 3, 4, 5 upwards. But what we do see from anecdotal evidence of those arriving and from contacts is that most of them seem to be in their late teens that are unaccompanied.
Yeah.
Those that are younger than that tend to have a family member with them who are attached. So what we're looking at is predominantly those over the age of 13 and 14.
Right, and again, look, I've got a 16-year-old. She probably thinks she's very mature and grown up, but she's still a child, certainly in my eyes and in the eyes of the law. We should be concerned about these youngsters. There will be a concern that some of these people have been trafficked here, sold or encouraged to come here. Some of them, again, will have perhaps been, persuaded, cajoled. They feel they've come of their own free will, but actually, of course, they are still children. We should treat them as such. We shouldn't have different expectations of children from Albania as children in this country in terms of what they can do. How concerned should we be about what happens to these kids? Because are they just sort of disappearing into the black market, organised criminal circles where they, let's face it, for some of them, they've come from places like Albania, that's where they've come from already. Or are we worried that even worse, and that's pretty bad for a teenager, worse is happening and they are being trafficked, sold as sex workers, to be gang raped, sold to basically slave work. How worried should we be about these kids?
Well, I think you raised two important points there, Julia. The first of them is that this country, like yourself and I, are very concerned about the welfare of children. And that is why we do assess them pretty carefully. And when they're put into hotels, they're placed under a very careful program with local authorities to be able to monitor them. The second question is really how worried should we be? And this is where I start to try and look behind the details. So I asked the Home Office for a further update. They didn't provide one yesterday on the status of these children or the ones that have been accused of being trafficked or kidnapped. But the police reports from Brighton has suggested that they have received no reports of kidnapping, and there are no reports of kidnapping from hotels of children across the country.
Who would, if it's an unaccompanied teenager, who would make that report?
Well, the reports have been coming, if you look at the Guardian report or that in the Argos local newspaper, are from unidentified quotes from individuals who are deemed to be whistleblowers.
Right.
So the Home Office don't have any reports, the police don't have any reports, but the newspaper does have a report from somebody suggesting that this is happening. And what we can say is happening is that children are being taken into cars now and then being picked up. And the police do report that these children are being identified, in this case, on the M25. The question you then have to ask is, are they going willingly or are they being transported illegally?
Yeah.
And what would happen is if they're not being done willingly, then those people would be arrested. But what you saw in this case is that the two people in the car were allowed to go away, straight away, and the children were just taken back into a different care.
Yeah.
And what I suspect is happening is the people traffickers may well be getting smarter, allowing some of those who are in the late teens to claim that they are children, when we know that many of them later are investigated and found out not to be children. And then they say, right, let's get into the car and distribute you amongst our friends and family up and down the country. And when the police arrest them, that's why they're being let go, is because they are connected to these people and they're not being feared. So I think there does need to be an investigation, Julia.
What's really going on? Yeah,
what's really going on?
The headline doesn't necessarily match the reality. What I found really interesting was the outcry about this by the Guardian and Caroline Lucas for the Green Party in Parliament, very animated about it. I'm sure it'll come up again at PMQs and the like. An awful lot of these people, I don't remember them being so concerned about. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be concerned about children who've who've come from abroad who are in these asylum hotels being, if they are being abducted, or even if they are going willingly, they're still children. We still have a duty of care. But they don't seem to be so concerned when it's British children, when it's white working class girls who are being taken out of care homes to be gang raped across pretty much every city and town in this country. They didn't seem to care about that for years. Don't seem to care about it now while it's still happening. But they do care about these other kids. I would just like that if everyone, could we all care about all of the children all of the time and not just some of the kids who have the, I don't know, the right credentials?
Absolutely, and this is, as a father, my first concern is about looking after my daughter. I tell my daughter that there are like 1,000 rules as a dad, and the first of the rules, rule number 1, is I've got to look after you, and rule number 2 is I worry about you. Rule number 3 is I worry about rules 1 and 2. So, so I believe that everybody should be looking after children, whether they're those who have been damaged badly, as we saw in Yorkshire and in Oxford and across the Lancashire towns, as those who are arriving in different countries. But what I find often hypocritical, and why people criticise people like Caroline Lucas, is if there are 4,022 children, as the Home Office is suggesting, in these hotels, why hasn't she taken one in her own? Why are all those MPs sitting there on the Houses in Parliament and on the Houses of the Lord benches, who are constantly complaining about it, taking a single child? Because if they did, with the great and the good, they wouldn't be in the hotels and they wouldn't be subject to trafficking. Put their money where their mouths are for once in their lives.